"Excuse me, you can't do that here." Whitney Crane stood at the edge of the lawn, white binder clutched like armor. Her voice cut through the laughter and music of the Reed family's barbecue. Across the grass, Jordan Reed froze at the grill, his 8-year-old daughter tugging nervously at his sleeve. "We filed the permit," Jordan said calmly. "We followed every rule." Whitney's eyes narrowed. "Charcoal is prohibited. This entire barbecue is a violation." The laughter dimmed. Even the smoke seemed to pause. Jordan's wife held up the laminated permit, but Whitney didn't look. She was already dialing the HOA. Minutes later, Evelyn Park, the HOA president, arrived. She flipped open Whitney's binder, scanned the page, and tapped a clause Whitney had been clinging to for years. "This rule was changed," Evelyn said, her tone calm but sharp. She glanced at the children, the food, the family gathered, then looked Whitney dead in the eye. "And today, you're the one out of line." The neighborhood froze. Smoke curled in the air, heavy with more than just the smell of barbecue. Jordan's daughter gripped his arm, her wide eyes asking the question no child should ever have to ask, "Are we in trouble for just being here?" Whitney's binder trembled in her hands. For the first time, she wasn't sure if the rules she clung to would save her or expose her. This wasn't just about food or noise. It was about who belonged and who had the power to decide. And in that quiet moment, one truth hung over the street. Someone was about to be put in their place. If you've ever felt unfairly singled out, you'll know exactly why this story matters. Kindly subscribe and watch this story to the end because the next chapter will reveal exactly who gets sent home, and it's not who Whitney expected. Tell me this, if this were your family, how would you want the HOA to respond? Now let's get back to where it all started. Jordan Reed planned the day down to the smallest detail. He knew how these things could go. The night before, he triple-checked the HOA guidelines, highlighted the lines that mattered, and laminated the permit like it was a shield. The grill sat on a fireproof mat, an extinguisher leaned against the fence, and the email confirmation from Evelyn Park, the HOA president, was printed and tucked in a folder on the patio table. This wasn't just a barbecue. It was a statement, one that said we belong here just as much as anyone else. By noon, the yard was alive. Aunties laughed over foil pans of mac and cheese. Kids shrieked under the sprinkler, their wet footprints painting joy across the grass. The air carried the rhythm of music, smoke, and a community finally exhaling together. From across the street, behind crisp curtains, Whitney Crane was already watching. Her hydrangeas stood in perfect rows, her lawn trimmed to the exact inch. To her, order was the only language that mattered. And in her eyes, the Reed's joy was disorder. She opened her binder of HOA rules, the edges frayed from years of flipping to the same few pages. Her finger landed on the line about charcoal grills. She didn't read the update below it. She never had. She only saw what she wanted, a reason to call it a violation. Whitney didn't see the permit taped to the gazebo. She didn't see the fireproof mat. She didn't want to. She lifted her phone and pressed record, capturing a few seconds of smoke and laughter. Cropped tight, stripped of context, the video looked like chaos. It looked like evidence. "This isn't allowed," she whispered to herself. Across the street, Amara Reed, Jordan's wife, noticed her. A glance passed between her and Jordan. It wasn't new. It was the look black families knew too well. Here it comes. Jordan's chest tightened, but he didn't move. Not yet. He had done everything right. That was the point. When Whitney finally stepped off her porch, binder tucked under her arm like a badge, Jordan knew the barbecue had shifted. It was no longer just about food or family. It was about to become a test. Whitney Crane crossed the street like she owned it. Her binder pressed against her chest, sunglasses hiding the sharp calculation in her eyes. Every step was deliberate, as if each footfall declared authority. The chatter of the Reed family softened to a wary silence, like a breeze sucked out of the day. Jordan tightened his grip on the tongs. The ribs hissed on the grill, but he barely heard them anymore. His daughter tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, is that lady mad at us?" He knelt slightly, forced a smile onto his face. "She's just confused, baby. Eat your food, okay?" But his eyes never left Whitney. She stopped at the edge of the yard. This, she gestured to the grill, the music, the laughter, is not permitted. It's against HOA rules. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He never did. We filed a permit. We followed the updates. It's all here if you want to look. He nodded toward the laminated sheet on the gazebo post. Whitney didn't even glance at it. Her jaw tightened. Charcoal is prohibited. Always has been. Always will be. You can't just break the rules because you feel like it. Amara stepped forward, arms folded, her calm masking fire. We're not breaking rules. We live here. We pay dues same as you. We're allowed. Whitney tilted her chin, dismissing her. Charcoal is unsafe. Property values, air quality. Property values? Jordan asked, voice steady but sharp. Over a barbecue? Whitney's lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile. It starts small. Today it's smoke. Tomorrow it's noise. Next week it's more people. This is how neighborhoods decline. The words sank like poison. Decline. Noise. People. Everyone understood what she meant, even if she didn't say it. Jordan's uncle, leaning against the fence, muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's not worried about charcoal. She's worried about color." A ripple of agreement ran through the yard. But Jordan held up a hand. He didn't want the day to spiral into shouting. That's what Whitney wanted, to provoke, to bait, to control. Still, the silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that exposes truth. Whitney's phone was already in her hand. "I'll handle this properly," she said, dialing. "The HOA will shut this down. Today." Amara's voice cut in, low and sharp. "Do you ever get tired?" Whitney blinked. "Excuse me? Do you ever get tired of looking at joy and finding a reason to end it?" Whitney didn't answer. She turned away, pressing her phone to her ear. "Yes, Evelyn? This is Whitney Crane. We have a major violation here. Charcoal grill, loud music, people everywhere. Completely unsafe. I need you to come down immediately." Jordan closed his eyes. Evelyn Park. At least there was some fairness there. He'd dealt with her before, reasonable, professional, not like Whitney. But still, the pit in his stomach remained. Power had been called. And power rarely showed up neutral. 20 minutes later, a dark sedan rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. The music had lowered, the kids pulled back from the lawn, but the scent of barbecue still clung to the air. Everyone was waiting. Evelyn Park stepped out, clipboard in hand, her presence calm but commanding. She was in her early 50s, Korean-American, sharp eyes softened by years of mediating disputes exactly like this one. Her tailored jacket hung neat, her shoes clicked against the pavement with authority. "Good afternoon," she said, voice even. "What seems to be the problem?" Whitney pounced. "Finally. Evelyn, thank you for coming. This entire event is a violation of HOA policy. They're using charcoal grills, which are prohibited. There's noise, excess guests, it's disorderly and unsafe." She thrust the binder forward like evidence in a trial. Evelyn took it, flipped through a few pages with a calm hand, then looked up. "And you are?" Whitney bristled. "Whitney Crane, Vice Chair of the HOA Committee." "I know who you are," Evelyn said, tone cool. "And you?" She turned to Jordan, her expression softening. "You're Dr. Reed, correct?" Jordan nodded. "Yes. We filed the permit 2 weeks ago. Laminated copies on the gazebo. Email confirmation too. Charcoal was approved with a fireproof mat and extinguisher, both of which we have." Evelyn walked over, inspected the setup herself. Fireproof mat. Extinguisher. Grill spaced safely away from the house. Exactly as written. She nodded once. "Everything checks out." Whitney sputtered. "What? No, that can't be right. Charcoal is prohibited. Page 47. Evelyn raised the binder. This edition is 5 years out of date. The policy was amended 3 summers ago. We updated it after repeated requests from multiple families, including yours, if I recall correctly." Whitney's face reddened. "I don't remember that." "Convenient," murmured someone from the Reed's family. Laughter rippled under their breath. Evelyn closed the binder, her gaze firm on Whitney. The Reeds followed the rules. They filed, they complied, and they have my approval. There is no violation here. The tension broke like a string snapping. Children ran again. Music floated back into the air. The scent of ribs once more filled the yard. Relief washed across Jordan's face, but it was layered with something heavier, vindication. Whitney, however, stood frozen. Her binder no longer felt like armor. It felt like dead weight. Now, Evelyn added, her tone carrying finality, what concerns me is the repeated pattern of selective complaints. This is not the first time I've been called here for something that wasn't a violation. And I have to wonder, why is it always the same families on the receiving end? The words hung heavy. Neighbors shifted uneasily. The truth was out in the open now, not whispered but spoken aloud by authority. Whitney swallowed, but no words came. Jordan caught Amara's eye. For the first time all day, she smiled. Not because the battle was over, but because finally, someone else had said it. But Evelyn wasn't done. She turned back to Whitney, voice crisp. Whitney, we need to have a formal discussion about your position on this committee. A pattern like this cannot continue. It reflects poorly on the HOA as a whole. Whitney's mouth fell open. Are you suggesting? Evelyn cut her off gently, but firmly. I'm suggesting accountability, which starts today. The neighborhood had come to watch the Reeds be shamed. Instead, it was Whitney Crane standing on trial, binder in hand, with nowhere left to turn. And for the first time, she realized she might not be the one enforcing the rules anymore. Whitney Crane had never felt small in this neighborhood before. For years, her binder had been her shield, her weapon, her proof that she was the gatekeeper of order. She wielded it in block meetings, in driveways, in whispered confrontations by the mailbox. People rolled their eyes at her sometimes, yes, but they also stepped back. They complied. They treated her word like law. But now, standing in the middle of the Reed family's yard with Evelyn Park's calm judgment slicing through her defenses, Whitney felt stripped bare. This isn't about rules, Evelyn had said. This is about accountability. The words gnawed at her long after the barbecue laughter rose again. The binder was heavy in her arms, its plastic cover pressing into her ribs like a reminder of how flimsy her authority had become. She couldn't leave. To walk away would be to admit defeat. Jordan Reed turned back to his grill, the tongs clinking softly as he lifted a slab of ribs. His movements were calm, measured. He didn't look at Whitney anymore, and somehow that stung worse than direct confrontation. To be dismissed, ignored, was unbearable. Amara Reed offered plates to their neighbors, her voice light, her smile genuine. People gathered closer to the Reed family now, their laughter loosening again. The very ones Whitney had expected to nod in agreement, to back her up, were leaning into the music, the smell of smoke, the warmth of belonging. It wasn't just that she had lost the argument. She was losing the neighborhood. Evelyn, Whitney tried again, voice cracking just slightly, you can't be serious about removing me from the committee. I've dedicated years. I've kept this place in shape. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. Keeping order isn't the same as keeping people out. This community deserves better than rules used as weapons. The crowd shifted. Murmurs spread. Someone near the fence whispered, "She's right." Another added, "Whitney's been on us for flower pots, for flags, always something." Whitney spun, her composure breaking. "You think without me this place wouldn't fall apart? You think letting people bend the rules, stretch them, break them, will keep your property safe? I'm the one who protects your investments. I'm the one who makes sure this neighborhood doesn't decline." The word decline fell again like ash in the air. The implication was too clear now, too naked. The crowd stiffened. Jordan's uncle spoke up, louder this time. "Decline? You mean families like ours moving in? That's what you've been saying for years, isn't it?" A low hum of agreement rolled through the crowd. A woman from 2 houses down, white hair tied back in a bun, raised her voice next. "Whitney, I remember when you told me to report any suspicious gatherings on this block. You meant the Reeds. You meant the Garcias. Don't act like this is about charcoal." Whitney's throat tightened. Her authority was unraveling thread by thread, and the worst part was she couldn't stitch it back together fast enough. "Everyone here is twisting my words," she said, voice rising. "I just care about safety. I just care about the rules." But the more she insisted, the hollower it sounded. Evelyn finally closed the binder and held it out to Whitney. "Rules are only as strong as the fairness behind them. Without that, they're nothing but paper. And right now, Whitney, that's all this is. Paper." Whitney didn't take it. She couldn't. Her hands shook too much. Amara stepped forward then, not with fire but with grace. "We all care about this neighborhood. We all want it safe. But safety isn't just about houses and lawns. It's about knowing we can gather without being treated like intruders in our own yard." Her words landed. Neighbors nodded, eyes softening. It was everything Whitney had failed to give them in years of chairing meetings and filing complaints. A vision of belonging. The spotlight shifted entirely now. People gravitated toward the Reed's yard, drawn by the smell of food, the sound of children laughing, the feeling that this was what community should look like. Whitney stood apart, binder pressed uselessly against her chest. Someone in the crowd said what many were thinking, maybe it's not the Reeds who don't belong. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it cut her deeper than shouting ever could. Whitney turned toward Evelyn, desperation in her voice. "You can't just strip me of my position. There are procedures. There are bylaws." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, sharp but calm. "And you will have the chance to speak at the next meeting. But until then, I'm suspending your role. Effective immediately." It was official. Public. Irreversible. Gasps rose from the crowd. The Reed's daughter clapped without understanding the weight of it, her innocent joy breaking the tension for just a moment. Adults chuckled, the sound warm, human, undeniable. Whitney's binder slipped from her hands, hitting the grass with a soft thud. Papers fanned out, catching the wind, scattering across the yard like rules undone. Children chased them, laughing as the pages tumbled. Jordan bent to pick one up, his eyes meeting Whitney's for the first time since the confrontation began. His voice was quiet, steady. "We followed every rule. Maybe it's time you learn to live by them too." Whitney's face burned. Around her, the world kept moving, plates clinking, laughter swelling, the smell of ribs growing stronger. But for her, everything had stalled. She wanted to scream, to claw back the control slipping through her fingers. But all she could do was stand there as the community she thought she commanded turned its back on her. And in that silent rejection, Whitney Crane realized the most dangerous truth of all. Authority without respect is nothing at all. Night fell heavy on the cul-de-sac. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by the faint sweetness of cut grass and the hum of crickets. Most of the guests had gone home, plates wrapped in foil, hugs exchanged at the curb. But the Reed family sat together on the back porch, the glow of the citronella candles flickering over their faces. For the first time that day, Jordan allowed himself to exhale fully. He leaned back, feeling the muscles in his shoulders finally unclench. "We made it," he whispered almost to himself. Amara rested her hand on his knee. "We more than made it." Evelyn stood up. Everyone saw it. She paused, her eyes drifting toward the dark window across the street. "But Whitney's not done." Jordan followed her gaze. Whitney's house was dark, but not the kind of dark that meant sleep. It was a watchful dark. Curtains closed too tightly. Silence too thick. "She'll find another way," Amara murmured. Jordan nodded. He didn't want to admit it aloud, but she was right. Whitney Crane had been embarrassed, suspended, publicly stripped of her authority. People like her didn't just swallow defeat. They plotted. Inside Whitney's house, the binder sat sprawled across her kitchen table, its pages wrinkled from the grass, sticky from barbecue sauce smudges picked up when she tried to gather them back. She had reorganized it 3 times already, hands trembling, mind racing. Evelyn's words replayed in her head, every syllable dripping with humiliation. Suspended effective immediately. The neighborhood had laughed. The Reeds had smiled. Whitney had been left standing alone, stripped of the one thing that gave her power, the rules. She poured herself a glass of wine, swallowed too quickly, and stared at the stacks of paper. If rules could no longer protect her authority, she would need something stronger. Something that could not be dismissed by a technicality. Her laptop glowed as she typed, searching through the HOA bylaws, the city ordinances, anything that could be weaponized. Noise complaints, parking restrictions, maximum occupancy laws. There had to be a line somewhere she could use. But beneath the clatter of keys and the swirl of anger was something deeper: fear. Whitney had built her identity on control. Without it, she felt exposed, powerless. And she would rather be hated than powerless. Across the street, Jordan tucked his daughter into bed. She looked up at him, eyes wide with lingering worry. "Daddy, is that lady still mad at us?" He smoothed her hair gently. She was wrong. And when people are wrong, sometimes they get mad. But we did nothing bad, okay? We're safe. Her small voice cracked. She looked at us like we didn't belong here. The words cut deeper than Whitney's accusations ever had. Jordan kissed her forehead, whispering, "You belong everywhere love is. And there's love here." But when he closed her door, the weight settled back onto his chest. Love was not always enough to protect against resentment sharpened into obsession. The next morning, an email appeared in several inboxes across the neighborhood. The subject line read, "Concerns about community standards." It was written by Whitney Crane. The tone was formal, polite, draped in the language of concern. She wrote of noise levels, of gatherings that stretched beyond reasonable hours, of increased traffic and safety issues. She never used the Reed's name, but no one needed her to. Every word pointed at them. Some neighbors deleted the email immediately, tired of her constant complaints. Others, less sure, wondered if maybe there was truth in it. Doubt crept in like a draft under the door. At the grocery store later that week, Amara overheard whispers. The barbecue was nice, but it did get a little loud. Traffic was heavy with all those cars parked along the street. It wasn't much. Just fragments, but enough to remind her that Whitney's voice, even weakened, still carried weight with some. That night, Amara told Jordan what she'd heard. His jaw tightened. She's trying to build a case. She can't win with rules, so now she's stirring shadows. Amara nodded, and shadows spread if no one speaks against them. But Jordan wasn't sure how much energy he had left for another fight. He was a doctor, already exhausted from long shifts at the hospital. He wanted home to be rest, not battlefield. Whitney, meanwhile, doubled down. She cornered neighbors on their evening walks, dropping phrases like declining standards and safety risks. She framed herself as the one willing to speak hard truths. Some avoided her. Others nodded politely just to escape. A few agreed outright, giving her the encouragement she craved. Yet for every whisper she planted, there was laughter echoing from the Reed's yard, lights spilling from their windows, music humming softly in the background. The family refused to shrink. And that defiance, more than anything, drove Whitney to rage. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn Park rang the Reed's doorbell. She carried no clipboard this time, no formal authority. Just her presence. "I wanted to check in," she said softly. "I know Whitney won't let this go easily." Jordan invited her in. They sat around the table, the smell of coffee filling the air. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice steady. "I meant what I said the other day. She's suspended. But she's loud, and loud people can still cause damage. The board will support you, but I need you to be prepared. She may escalate." Jordan felt the truth of it in his bones. "Prepared how?" "Document everything," Evelyn advised. "Every conversation, every letter, every interaction. The more she pushes, the clearer the pattern becomes. And when that pattern is undeniable, we can act decisively." Amara's eyes hardened. "So we wait for her to make another move." Evelyn nodded. "Yes. And she will." Whitney was already planning it, across the street in her dim kitchen, staring out the window at the warm light glowing from the Reed's home. She gripped her wine glass so tightly her knuckles blanched. "They think they've won," she whispered to herself. "But this isn't over." And deep inside, she vowed that if she couldn't control the neighborhood through rules, she would control it through fear. The email wasn't enough. The whispers weren't enough. Whitney Crane needed spectacle. She needed a stage. 2 weeks after the barbecue, flyers appeared in every mailbox on the block. The HOA would be holding an emergency meeting to address serious concerns regarding community standards and neighborhood safety. The flyer didn't mention the Reeds by name, but the implication was painted in bold strokes. Everyone knew. On the evening of the meeting, the community hall buzzed with restless energy. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, some clutching cups of coffee, others whispering among themselves. A few avoided eye contact entirely, afraid of being pulled into the storm. Jordan and Amara sat near the front, their daughter at home with her aunt. They were calm in posture but tense beneath the surface. Jordan kept his hands folded tightly in his lap, every muscle rehearsing patience. Amara scanned the crowd, reading faces, measuring the mood. Whitney entered late, binder clutched under her arm, her smile brittle and sharp. She wore a crisp white blouse, pearl earrings gleaming, her hair pulled back in a severe twist. She walked straight to the front and positioned herself by the podium like it was built for her alone. The room quieted as Evelyn Park stepped to the microphone. Her presence, steady and composed, filled the space. "Thank you all for coming. I understand there are concerns that need to be discussed. Let's make sure this meeting remains respectful." Whitney cleared her throat dramatically and raised her hand. "If I may begin?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Go ahead." Whitney strode to the podium, opened her binder, and began. "Our neighborhood has always prided itself on order, on safety, on preserving the values that make this community desirable. But recently, certain activities have jeopardized that. Excessive gatherings, loud music, smoke hazards, increased traffic. These behaviors threaten not only our peace but also our property values." Her voice rang with authority, and she fed on the silence that followed. She turned slightly, eyes sweeping over the crowd, then landing squarely on Jordan and Amara. "We cannot allow rules to be bent for convenience. If we do, what kind of neighborhood are we building?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded faintly. Others frowned. Jordan rose slowly, his voice even but strong. "We filed permits. We followed the guidelines. We complied with every rule." Evelyn herself confirmed it. "This isn't about safety. This isn't about property values. This is about something else." Whitney's eyes flashed. "Defensiveness is telling, Dr. Reed. If you had nothing to hide." Amara stood now, her voice cutting through Whitney's accusation. "Nothing to hide?" Our celebration was open. Neighbors were welcome. Children laughed. Music played. We weren't hiding. We were living. She turned to the crowd, her voice softening. "Ask yourselves, did you feel unsafe that day? Or did you feel community?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of thought, of memory, of truth pressing against Whitney's story. A man from the back raised his hand. "I was there. My kids played with the Reed's kids. It was fine. More than fine. It was the first time I felt like this neighborhood was alive." Another voice chimed in, sharper. "But the cars lined the street. It was hard to drive through." Whitney's not entirely wrong. Whitney seized on the opening. "Exactly. This is what I've been saying. We cannot allow chaos. One barbecue becomes 2, then 5, and suddenly our neighborhood is no better than." She stopped herself, but the unfinished sentence hung heavy. Everyone knew what she meant. An older woman, her voice trembling but firm, spoke up. "Whitney, you've called me 3 times in the past year. About my grandson's skateboard. About my flower pots. About my sister visiting overnight. It was never about rules. It was about control. You use the rules to decide who belongs." The hall stirred. Heads turned. Some faces hardened against Whitney, others softened toward the Reeds. The air was shifting. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant. "This is the heart of the matter. Rules exist to serve the community, not to target families. And when rules are twisted for exclusion, they lose their legitimacy." Whitney slammed her binder shut, her composure cracking. "You're all blind. You think they care about the neighborhood? They care about themselves. about bending the rules, about turning this place into. Her voice broke. Rage and desperation tangled into something raw and ugly. Jordan spoke quietly, almost too quietly, but the room leaned in. We care about belonging. About raising our daughter in a place where laughter isn't treated like a crime. About knowing our neighbors see us as equals, not intruders. The words struck deeper than any argument could. They weren't defensive. They weren't combative. They were human. The hall went still. Finally, Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Whitney Crane, as HOA president, I am moving forward with a motion to remove you from the committee permanently. Your actions no longer reflect the values of this community. Gasps echoed. Whitney's face drained of color. She clutched her binder like a lifeline. You can't, she whispered, her voice trembling. I built this neighborhood. But no one moved to defend her. No one echoed her outrage. The silence was her answer. Amara reached for Jordan's hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight shift off their shoulders. But beneath that relief was a shadow of unease. People like Whitney didn't vanish quietly. And as Whitney stood frozen at the podium, binder shaking in her hands, one thing was clear: she would not go down without a fight. Whitney Crane had lost the room, but she refused to lose the war. That night, she drove home from the community hall in silence, her binder abandoned on the passenger's seat like a corpse. The words replayed over and over in her head. Removed permanently. Evelyn's calm judgment. Jordan's steady dignity. Amara's fire wrapped in grace. The neighbors' murmurs, their shifting loyalties. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear but from rage. Rage at being cornered. Rage at being stripped of power. Rage at the humiliation of silence that followed when no one stood for her. She pulled into her driveway, lights from the Reed household glowing across the street. Music drifted faintly from their living room, laughter spilling out as if the meeting had never happened. They were celebrating her downfall. Whitney whispered into the darkness of her car, "Not yet. Not over." She stayed there for nearly an hour, watching their windows, rehearsing every possible move. The retaliation began small, sharp enough to sting but subtle enough to disguise. Trash appeared on the Reed's lawn one morning: fast food wrappers, crushed cans, cigarette butts. Jordan picked them up without complaint, but the knot in his stomach tightened. A week later, Amara found their mailbox pried open, envelopes scattered, one utility bill torn nearly in half. She taped it back together quietly, not wanting their daughter to see. At first, they wanted to believe it was random. A teenager passing through. A prank. But deep down, both knew better. "Whitney," Jordan said one evening, staring out at the house across the street. Curtains drawn. Porch light flickering. "This is her handwriting. Not on paper, but in action." Amara folded her arms. "And the neighborhood pretends not to notice. Easier to look away than admit what's happening." Their daughter overheard more than they thought. One night she asked softly, "Why does that lady hate us so much?" Jordan's chest tightened. He crouched beside her bed, struggling for words. "Some people think keeping control makes them safe. And when they lose it, they get angry. But anger doesn't mean they're right." She nodded, but her small hand clutched his like it was an anchor. Whitney escalated. Anonymous complaints began piling up at city offices. Noise disturbances, unregistered vehicles, improper waste disposal. Inspectors knocked on the Reed's door 3 times in 2 weeks, each visit finding nothing wrong. Each time, Jordan and Amara smiled politely, showed the paperwork, and watched the inspectors leave with embarrassed apologies. But the point wasn't to win. The point was to exhaust. To drain. To remind them that safety could be snatched away at any moment. Neighbors whispered, some sympathetic, others skeptical. "Maybe the Reeds are drawing too much attention," one woman murmured in the grocery store aisle. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." Amara overheard, her cheeks burning. She wanted to scream, to shake them awake. Instead, she pushed her cart forward, jaw clenched tight. Evelyn visited again, sitting with the Reeds at their kitchen table. "We can file harassment charges," she said, voice steady. "But without proof, it becomes your word against hers." Jordan rubbed his temples. Proof is slippery when the enemy hides behind shadows. Amara leaned forward, her voice trembling with controlled fury. How long are we supposed to wait? Until she throws a rock through our window? Until she scares our daughter half to death? Evelyn's eyes softened. We're not waiting. We're watching. And when she crosses the line far enough, she won't be able to walk back. That line came closer one evening. The Reeds returned from dinner to find spray paint on their driveway. A single word, scrawled in angry red, enough. Their daughter burst into tears at the sight, clutching Amara's waist. Jordan pulled her inside quickly, heart pounding, before she could see the neighbors gathering at the curb. Whispers swirled, faces pale in the porch light. Whitney stood on her porch, arms folded, expression blank. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even flinch as eyes darted toward her. The silence was accusation enough, but still nothing that could be pinned down as proof. Amara knelt by their daughter's bed that night, her voice steady but shaking inside. You're safe. You're loved. That's stronger than anything she can throw at us. But when the girl finally fell asleep, Amara broke. Tears streamed silently down her face. Jordan held her, whispering, "She wants us broken. She doesn't get that." Yet even he wasn't sure how much longer they could endure. Whitney, meanwhile, stared at her own reflection in the darkened window. The word enough replayed in her head, but not as a warning. As a mantra. She had convinced herself she was the last defense of the neighborhood, the final guardrail against decline. Losing her role on the committee had only confirmed the story she whispered to herself at night, that no one else was strong enough to do what needed to be done. Her obsession had outgrown the rules. Now it was personal. She began a new list in her binder, not of regulations, but of names. Families who smiled at the Reeds. Neighbors who spoke against her at the meeting. Anyone who had laughed when Evelyn stripped her of authority. One by one, she circled them in red ink. This wasn't about charcoal anymore. It wasn't about barbecues or permits or bylaws. It was about revenge. The night Whitney Crane finally crossed the line, the whole neighborhood saw it. It was a Friday evening, warm air humming with cicadas, porch lights glowing across the cul-de-sac. The Reeds were sitting outside with Evelyn and a few close neighbors, enjoying the quiet after weeks of tension. Laughter drifted softly, their daughter's giggles ringing out as she ran through the yard with sparklers. Whitney stood across the street, hidden by her blinds, watching. She had been watching for hours. Watching and feeding her anger until it boiled past reason. And then she snapped. The sound came first, tires screeching against pavement. Whitney's car lurched from her driveway, swerving across the street, headlights flooding the Reeds' yard. Neighbors gasped, voices rising in alarm as she slammed the brakes just short of the curb. She jumped out, hair disheveled, eyes wild, binder clutched in one hand. Pages spilled across the ground as she pointed a shaking finger at Jordan. "You don't belong here," she screamed, her voice breaking under the weight of months of resentment. "You've poisoned this neighborhood. You've turned them all against me." Children cried. Adults rushed forward, shouting for calm, for someone to call the police. Evelyn stepped between Whitney and the Reeds, her stance firm. "Enough, Whitney. This ends tonight." But Whitney shoved past her, fury spilling unchecked. "You think you're safe because you smile and play music and hand out ribs? You think you can erase me? I built this place. I made these people listen. And I'll—" Her words cut off as flashing red and blue lights flooded the street. Someone had already dialed 911. Officers stepped out quickly, commanding the scene with sharp voices. "Ma'am, put the binder down. Step back. Right now." Whitney froze, eyes darting wildly from the officers to the neighbors, to Jordan, to Evelyn. She opened her mouth to argue, but the binder slipped from her trembling hands and hit the pavement with a hollow thud. For the first time, she had no words. Neighbors spilled from their porches, gathering at the edge of the street. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were voices rising together. She's harassed them for months. She vandalized their home. She's threatened the Reeds. The pattern Evelyn warned about had unfolded in the open. And this time, there was no hiding it. The officers took Whitney gently but firmly by the arms, guiding her toward the car. She screamed once, a raw, broken sound, but it faded under the chorus of the neighborhood's testimony. When the door shut behind her and the cruiser pulled away, the street felt different. Lighter. The neighbors turned back to the Reeds, their faces softening with apology, with solidarity. One by one, people stepped forward, offering words of support, promises to do better, to see clearer, to stand sooner. Amara held Jordan's hand tightly, tears shining in her eyes. Their daughter peeked from the porch, frightened but safe, her sparklers still glowing faintly in the dark. Evelyn placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "It's over now. But it never should have come this far." Jordan nodded, his voice low but steady. "It's not just Whitney. It's the silence that let her grow this loud." The words lingered, heavy and true. Later, when the street quieted and their daughter finally slept, Jordan and Amara sat together under the night sky. The cicadas hummed again. The stars glowed faintly above. Jordan spoke softly, more to the air than to Amara. This was never just about a barbecue. It was about who gets to claim belonging. Who gets to say what's normal, what's safe. Whitney lost tonight, but she's not the only one who ever thought the rules were hers to wield. Amara leaned into him, her voice warm but fierce. "Then maybe tonight is where we start changing that. Maybe now they see." The neighborhood had shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for the Reeds to know they weren't alone anymore. Enough for Whitney's power to finally shatter. And as the quiet stretched between them, Jordan whispered the truth that would carry beyond this one night. Justice isn't just punishment. It's people choosing to stand together. If this story stirred something in you, let it be more than just a story. Tap the like button to show that families like the Reeds deserve to feel safe in their own homes. Subscribe so you don't miss the stories that shine a light on everyday struggles and small victories of justice. And share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their power? Did your community rise to stop it? Or stay silent? Because when we talk, when we share, when we refuse to look away, that's when real change begins.